The dust settled behind the departing wagon as Jacob Matthews stood at his fence line, his weathered hands gripping the wooden post until his knuckles turned white. He had just witnessed something that made his blood boil. His neighbor, Thomas Brennan, had left a young woman standing alone on the prairie road with nothing but a single trunk and the clothes on her back. The woman's face was a mixture of shock and devastation as she watched the wagon disappear into the horizon, taking with it whatever dreams she had carried across the country. Jacob had known Thomas for 5 years, ever since they had both claimed adjacent parcels of land in the Kansas Territory. Thomas was a hard man, quick to anger and slow to show kindness, but Jacob never imagined he would do something so cruel. The woman stood there for a long moment, her shoulders beginning to shake, and Jacob knew he couldn't just stand by and watch. His late wife, Sarah, would have haunted him from the grave if he had. He grabbed his hat from the fence post and made his way down the road. As he approached, the young woman looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. She was perhaps 25, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and intelligent eyes that spoke of education and breeding. Her traveling dress was modest but well-made, suggesting she came from a respectable family back east. "Ma'am," Jacob said, removing his hat. "I'm Jacob Matthews. I own the ranch just over that rise. I saw what happened, and I can't in good conscience leave you stranded out here. Would you allow me to offer you shelter until you can make proper arrangements?" The woman studied him carefully, and Jacob didn't blame her for being cautious. She had just been abandoned by one man she had trusted. Why should she trust another? But the prairie was no place for a woman alone, especially with night approaching. "My name is Eleanor Hartwell," she said finally, her voice steady despite the tears that had traced paths down her dusty cheeks. "I came from Boston to marry Mr. Brennan. We had corresponded for 8 months. His letters were so kind, so full of promise about building a life together." She paused, swallowing hard. "When I arrived at the station this morning, he took one look at me and said I wasn't what he expected. He said I was too plain, too educated, too opinionated. He drove me out here and told me to find my own way back." Jacob felt his jaw tighten. A man who judges a woman he invited halfway across the country by her appearance alone isn't worth the dirt on his boots. "You deserve better than Thomas Brennan, Miss Hartwell. My offer stands. You're welcome at my ranch for as long as you need." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Matthews. I accept your kindness, though I intend to work for my keep. I won't be a burden." Jacob picked up her trunk, surprised by its weight, and led her back toward his property. The ranch house was modest but well-maintained, with a barn, a small chicken coop, and a vegetable garden that desperately needed attention. Since Sarah had passed 2 years ago from pneumonia, Jacob had let some things slide. He worked the cattle and kept the house clean enough, but the little touches that made a house a home had disappeared. That first evening was awkward. Jacob heated water for Eleanor to wash and offered her Sarah's old room. Over a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, Eleanor told him more about her situation. She had been a schoolteacher in Boston, never married because she had spent years caring for her ailing mother. After her mother's death, Eleanor had found herself alone at an age when most women were already settled with families. The correspondence with Thomas had seemed like a chance for a fresh start. A new life in a growing country. "I should have known better," Eleanor said quietly, staring at her plate. "His letters were so formal, so impersonal. But I convinced myself that he was simply reserved, that we would grow closer once we met." "You did nothing wrong," Jacob assured her. "You came here in good faith. Thomas is the one who broke that faith." Over the following days, Eleanor proved true to her word about not being a burden. She took over the kitchen, transforming Jacob's plain meals into proper dinners. She mended his clothes, which had accumulated holes and loose buttons. She attacked the neglected garden with determination, coaxing life back into the soil. Jacob protested at first, insisting she was his guest, but Eleanor was stubborn. "I need to feel useful, Mr. Matthews," she explained one morning as she tackled a mountain of laundry. "If I sit idle, I'll spend all day thinking about what a fool I was." "You weren't a fool," Jacob said, and he meant it. "You were brave. It takes courage to leave everything you know and travel to an uncertain future." As weeks passed, Jacob found himself looking forward to coming in from the range each evening. The house felt alive again in a way it hadn't since Sarah's death. Eleanor had a quick mind and a sharp wit, and their dinner conversations ranged from politics to philosophy to practical matters of ranch management. She asked questions about cattle breeding, water rights, and crop rotation with genuine interest. Jacob discovered that teaching her about ranch life brought him unexpected joy. One evening, about a month after Eleanor's arrival, Jacob found her sitting on the porch at sunset, a letter in her hands. She had been corresponding with her former employer in Boston, exploring the possibility of returning to teach there. The sight of that letter filled Jacob with an emotion he hadn't expected, dread at the thought of her leaving. "You've heard back," he said, sitting down beside her. Eleanor nodded. "Mrs. Henderson says my position has been filled, but she knows of other schools that might hire me. She's offered to make inquiries." She was quiet for a moment. "Jacob, I need to ask you something honestly. Am I imposing on your hospitality? Have I overstayed my welcome?" Jacob was startled by the question, and by her use of his first name, which had become natural between them over the past weeks. "Eleanor, you're not imposing at all. In fact, He stopped, uncertain how to express what he felt. "This ranch has felt like a home again since you arrived. I'd forgotten what that was like." Eleanor turned to look at him, and in the fading light, Jacob saw something in her eyes that made his heart beat faster. "I've felt more at home here in a month than I did in 10 years in Boston," she said softly. "But I can't stay indefinitely on your charity, Jacob. People will talk. It isn't proper." Jacob had been thinking about this problem for days. The neighboring ranchers had already started speculating about the woman living at his ranch. He had explained the situation to those who asked, but he knew how quickly rumors could spread. More importantly, he had realized over the past weeks that he didn't want Eleanor to leave, not to return to Boston, not to teach at some distant school, not for any reason. "Eleanor," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "I have a proposition. It might seem sudden, but I want you to hear me out." She nodded, and he continued. "When I lost Sarah, I thought that part of my life was over. I wasn't looking for companionship or love again. But you've brought light back into this house, into my life. I know you came here expecting marriage to Thomas, and that ended badly. But if you were willing to consider it, I would be honored if you would marry me." Eleanor's eyes widened, and Jacob hurried on before she could speak. "I'm not a romantic man, Eleanor. I can't offer you poetry or grand gestures. But I can offer you respect, partnership, and a home where you're valued for exactly who you are, your intelligence, your strength, your opinions, all of it. I've come to care for you deeply these past weeks, and I believe we could build a good life together." Eleanor was silent for so long that Jacob feared he had made a terrible mistake. Then she smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Jacob Matthews, you just gave me the most romantic proposal I could imagine. Not because of flowery words, but because you see me, truly see me, and value what you see. Yes, I'll marry you." They were married 3 weeks later by the circuit preacher, with Jacob's foreman and his wife as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, nothing like the grand wedding Eleanor might have dreamed of as a girl, but as Jacob slipped Sarah's old wedding ring onto Eleanor's finger, she had insisted she wanted to honor the woman who had come before her. Eleanor felt a profound sense of rightness. Their marriage started as a partnership and grew into something deeper. Jacob taught Eleanor to ride, and she often accompanied him as he checked on the cattle. Eleanor organized the ranch's accounts, bringing order to years of haphazard record-keeping. She started a small school in their parlor, teaching the children of neighboring ranchers 3 days a week. Jacob built her a bookshelf and made trips to town to buy her books, delighting in her excitement over each new volume. The physical aspect of their marriage developed slowly, built on friendship and mutual respect rather than sudden passion. But when they finally came together fully as husband and wife, it was with a tenderness and understanding that neither had experienced before. Eleanor had never been with a man, and Jacob was patient and gentle, showing her that intimacy could be as much about emotional connection as physical desire. 6 months into their marriage, they encountered Thomas Brennan at the general store in town. Thomas looked haggard, his ranch clearly suffering from neglect. He stared at Eleanor with something like regret in his eyes. "I heard you married Matthews," he said gruffly. I suppose you think you got the better deal. Eleanor looked at the man who had abandoned her and felt nothing but pity. I don't think about it in those terms, Mr. Brennan. But I will say that I'm grateful for your rejection. It led me to exactly where I was meant to be. Jacob put his arm around Eleanor's waist, a gesture of both support and possession. You had your chance at happiness, Thomas, and you threw it away because of foolish pride. That's something you'll have to live with. As they walked out of the store together, Eleanor leaned into Jacob's side. You know, she said thoughtfully, when I left Boston, I thought I was traveling toward a specific destination, a specific future I had imagined. Instead, I found something better than anything I could have planned, a true partner, a real home, and love that grew from genuine respect and understanding. Jacob kissed her forehead. We were both given a second chance, Eleanor. I'm grateful every day that you were brave enough to take it. Their first year of marriage brought challenges, a harsh winter, a bout of illness, conflicts with neighbors over water rights. But they faced each obstacle together, their partnership growing stronger with each trial. Eleanor never regretted the journey that had brought her to Kansas, or the cruel rejection that had seemed like the end of her dreams but had actually been the beginning of her real life. Years later, when their children asked how their parents had met, Eleanor would tell them about the mail-order bride arrangement that had gone wrong, and how their father had rescued her from the roadside. But what she emphasized most was not the rescue itself, but what came after, how they had built a life together through mutual respect, shared work, and the kind of love that deepens with time rather than fading. It wasn't the story she had imagined writing when she left Boston, but it was so much better than anything she could have planned.